Hello, welcome. Thank you for joining.
Hey everyone.
As you join, would love to, if you could just pop a little hello in the chat. Let us know where it is that you are joining from, um, what you're most excited to have us discuss today. And we'll just give a few moments for everyone to arrive. Hello, hello. I'm seeing some familiar names here, which is wonderful. And we'll be getting started in a moment. But as you arrive, please just to pop a note in the chat, say hello, let us know where you're from. Also, let us know what you're most curious about. And even what you feel, if it speaks to you, what you feel like you need from our webinar today. Hi, Vishal. Okay. We're just going to give it a couple more moments for people to join and then we'll get started. Hi, Chimu. Georgina, hello. Rita. Okay, we're going to get started. I'll be keeping my eye on the waiting room, so I may pause to let people in here and there. But thank you so much for joining us today. This is a topic, Harry and I were just discussing that this is a topic that's really close to both of us. For me, particularly right now, it's a topic that I need. And so grateful that you're all here with us as we talk about it. And we really want to invite everyone to feel free to be chatty, right? Anything that's coming up for you, type it in the chat. If you have insights to share, they'll be helpful for everyone. If you have questions to ask, they'll be helpful for everyone, including us. So the more that we know what you're coming in with, the more that we can address that. So this is the first of a monthly webinar that we're going to be hosting that's wellness focused. That is all about, I mean, that's a very wide open topic, right? But I think one that we really need right now. And the first of which today is about hope. And joining us today is Harry Nair. I'm really grateful to have you here. Harry's a physiotherapist, a healthcare leader, an educator, and a youth coach, and the co-founder of Eye to Eyes, which is a platform dedicated to human development and transformative coaching. And so with his leadership experience at Women's College Hospital and his academic roles at University of Toronto, he brings a unique integration of science, psychology, and coaching to his work. Really excited to have you here, Harry. Every time that we've had conversations, they've inspired me. In fact, it was a conversation that we had a few weeks back that inspired the topic for this webinar. So would love it if you could just say a quick hello to everyone.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Tracy, for that introduction, and hello to everyone. It's an absolute honor and pleasure to be here today. And as you mentioned, Tracy, it's a the moment I saw that invite, and you're like, this is a great topic. Like you've hit it on the head. It's much needed. So I'm absolutely thrilled to be here, and thank you to everyone who's joining from us around the world.
Thank you. And many of you in the audience are familiar to me, and some are new. So I'll introduce myself as well. My name is Tracy. I'm a coach with, I'm a facilitator with Coacharya. I'm also the director of marketing, and I am a coach. And in my coaching practice, I tend to focus on wellness, and specifically mindfulness and somatics. So, and I'm also a meditation teacher. And as Harry said, this is a topic that's dear to both of us, and particularly at this time. I don't know about all of you, but I am actively avoiding the news right now. And every once in a while, when I do tune in, because I realize it's my responsibility to do so, I really have to navigate a lot in my nervous system, a lot of feelings of despair and overwhelm and just grief at what's happening in the world. And so I feel like I can use some hope. And I've also just been spending a lot of time thinking about the younger generation and the world that we're turning over to them. Let's start with the idea of hope itself, the concept of hope. How would you describe it?
Uh, and that's a great question, Tracy. The idea of hope. So when I first saw this, I mean, very honestly, what came up for me first was this line from a movie, The Shawshank Redemption. I'm not sure if you've watched it. It's a wonderful movie. I go back to it time and again. Andy Dufresne, the protagonist, talks about in a letter to his friend. He was incarcerated for a long time, and in that letter he says, "Hope is a good thing, maybe the best of things." So just a one-liner, but when you see the movie, like at the end of it, you get the context. When we are faced with uncertainty, when we don't know a way forward, when we are dealing with too many variables changing at a pace that's uncontrollable. So essentially, we feel grounded when we know things are in our control, when we are certain that there is no more control, the world is not, or like things or events around us are no longer in our control, or they're not going as per plan. What are we left with? That feeling of anxiety. I'm going to name certain emotions that we feel, and this is open to the audience as well. Please do share your thoughts. If there are feelings you have had that you have not been able to name, if there are thoughts that you've been sitting with that you haven't been able to articulate, if that resonates with you, please feel those thoughts or feelings here so that we can try and name some of them, because it starts with naming our emotions, our ability to name some of those emotions that gives us a little more control. And I'm hesitant to use the word control, but for want of a better word, agency probably is a better word, I would think. But just to make sure the the differentiation is very clear, we understand control very well. We may not get agency that very well. So I will hopefully through our conversation we can clarify that a little better. But essentially to that, the question, Tracy, however, I don't know the answer to that specifically, but what I do understand is without hope, we are spiraling. And hope is that anchor. Hope is that compass that guides us forward. And this is where it's important, where we need hope, but we also need an action plan. That's really the key factor, I would say. Hope without action is wishful thinking. It could be a longing, and that's really where the difference would be. So, how do you define? I haven't looked at a definition for hope, but it's that essential. It could be an emotion, it could be a felt sense, it could be a cognitive pattern. So there is evidence to all of this. Essentially, for me, when you ask or when you say hope, what is hope? Hope is that a sense that help us get up each morning and continue with our day. Without hope, we land in that bottom segment of the emotions, as David Hawkins named it. There are certain emotions like our grief, shame, guilt, anger, apathy. There is that lack of inaction or the lack of action or inaction towards everyday activities. So, hope is something that sustains action. Hope is something that moves us towards an outcome despite what's happening to us. So I'll just pause there. I don't know if that answers the question per se, but for me, it's a motivator, it's a catalyst, it's something that drives us onward despite what's happening around us.
Mm. That's a really important distinction. When I was doing some research prepping for this, I was really looking into that. What makes hope different from optimism, for example, or for something that I'm guilty of at times, which is like a sort of magical thinking, everything's going to work out. But there has to be action involved, right? There's an active component to hope that isn't there with, let's say, something like faith or optimism, where it's something outside of us or something that we see. There's an expectation of things working out to their, to be the best that's similar in all of those things. But hope involves this component of, I will work towards this, right?
Uh,
And
that's a point. You go ahead, Trace.
no, I'll end there.
No, because I feel you hit on a very important part of it where how do I say there's a critical difference when we look at optimism and hope. I think that's a valid point to clarify, and there's a lot of research on both entities, as it were. So let me ask this maybe, and this is again to the audience: how do you differentiate? What's the difference between therapy and coaching? And again, this is free for the audience. Please feel free to put in your thoughts. Let's take a moment. This is interactive. I think it's very important for us to differentiate this or understand that basic fundamental concept, which would help us navigate or incorporate hope as a habit better. And I want to be very intentional when I say that it is hope could be a habit. That's maybe something that I can vouch for. What do we think is the difference between therapy and coaching? What is your take, Tracy? What do you understand or what do you feel is the difference between therapy and coaching? A fundamental difference.
The fundamental difference for me, I think the first thing that comes up is the future forward approach. Definitely with therapy, there can be that. But with coaching, there's always a goal, right? There's always a goal that we're working towards. And we're always looking towards what it is that we want, right? Whereas I see that therapy is often a repair. It's there to help repair things that aren't working for us. And so that would be I would say the primary differences that are coming up for me in this moment.
Absolutely, Tracy. I think that I love that way. And I see some chats. Orientation with Sarika is saying orientation is past versus future. Coaching is about guiding the client. Absolutely. The fundamental difference, as it were, when we define it, coaching, because I've walked both fields. I've done the clinical, like I work with patients clinically who basically have or live with chronic pain, as well as our coaching clients. The fundamental difference, as I would explain, is therapy is repairing the past, or therapy deals with issues of the past. Coaching is future oriented. Extrapolating that, optimism is retrospective. Optimism is reframing when something, let's say something negative or something. Yeah, I see a lot of, yeah, perfect. Therapy is healing, usually mental health, any events. So optimism again is a cognitive way of thinking, which is what I meant by habit. So optimism is a trait or something that someone can cultivate or has or has become their personality trait in a way that any event excuse me, any event that happened to you, you can reframe it or you analyze it. You ask, is this permanent or is it something that's from my end? Like, is it my fault? Is it something that I did? And how long is it going to last? So you analyze it and you categorize it, and essentially you have a solution saying, yeah, it's not my fault. It's not permanent. I can still move forward. So it's also a way of positive thinking. Hope, on the other hand, is forward. It's future oriented, 100% future oriented, with a pathway and an action. So there are, I think it's an important categorization, because when you look, optimism might always go back to Martin Seligman, like the research that has spawned, like there are three stages that he would say, like the permanence, the essentially the personalization and the pervasiveness, how it impacts all in everything you do. Whereas hope moves you forward. It's really prospective and it's active. And that is a very fundamental difference, where someone feels, despite what's happening, I can see a path forward. I can do something about it. And
Mhm.
that is a real difference. So to sum it up, I would say you can be optimistic and hopeless, and they can coexist. So someone can always look back at what something that happened, or as it is happening to them in the present, they can say, "Oh, it's not my fault. It happened. That's fine." But no agency or no way of moving forward or looking at something as a next step to that particular event or that incident. Whereas hope is always looking at, what is in my control? What is it that I want to move towards? What is it that I want to change? And I believe I can do it. So that we need these two components, a way forward and the belief that I can change something, which is usually evidence based. So optimism is an integral part of hope, where you actually draw on past experiences, conditioning, your own responses and reactions to those events and the results thereof, which solidify that trait within you. And corollary, contrast to that, you can be pessimistic and still have hope. That, I think, that's usually what I find with the youth that I work with. Say, not, I know nothing's going to change, but I know exactly what to do next. Like the exam, I know it's going to tank. It's going to be hard. It's going to be like, it's going to suck. That's usually what I hear. It sucks, but I know what I need to do next. And that, I think, is a fundamental difference. Can one be hopeful without optimism? I see Sajmol, yes. You can be hopeful without optimism. However, to sustain that takes a ton of energy from you. Because optimism and hope usually go hand in hand. I'll pause here to see if there are more questions. And I'm not sure if I'm making sense here, but it's a lot. That's why I was telling you, it's a lot to unpack, and we can talk for hours, days on this. But essentially, what I would want to leave with is, as I understand it, is hope is essential for us to drive an action forward. Optimism is integral for us from a resilience perspective. That helps us get back up and moving. And hope actually changes the narrative. Whereas optimism doesn't change the narrative that we have in our own head about ourselves. It helps you, it kind of helps you bounce back, but hope is the buffer to hopelessness or inaction or any of the distractions that are thrown at us.
When you were talking about the way forward, right? And the way that hope is intertwined with that, it had me thinking about your experience with people that are dealing with chronic pain, that are dealing with, serious health issues, and having just gone through something myself and coming out on the other side of it. Um, I real, like I've done a lot of thinking about that. I've done a lot of thinking about people that know they're not coming out of through the other side. People that are recover that, I having gone through like a surgery and having a recovery plan and seeing things get better, made me really think about what about people that know that their pain is just going to get worse? What about people that know that they're, we all know our life is going to end, but they know their life is going to end sooner than they know when that's going to happen. How do they, well, I guess my question is, do they connect with hope?
It's a, again a very, very powerful question, Tracy. I'm trying to where do I begin? So let me talk about my experiences in a way just to see if I can capture it. Um, so I've been a physiotherapist since 2004, so it's all over 20 years. And I think I've been working or somehow or the other ended up working with people living with chronic pain since 2006, 7. So it's been almost 20 years that I've been specializing in essentially chronic pain, and within that, fibromyalgia as a subset. I don't know if you're familiar with that medical condition, chronic fatigue syndrome or fibromyalgia. These were essentially back in 2008, 9, and I was in India at that time, working out of a hospital. The research was very nascent. It was just coming out at that time. There wasn't enough mentorship or avenues to explore pathways to refer patients to, or even to explain to them what was happening to them, because we ourselves didn't fully understand the mechanism involved in chronic pain. So, which takes me back to what is pain. So I had to understand what pain was. So that took me back to 12th, 13th, 14th century, where there was a bifurcation between science and religion, spirituality, faith, as it were, at that time, where the body was essentially for medical or science, and then anything else related, the mind, the spirit, everything else was. So there was a very clear delineation. And if you look at the Cartesian, Descartes, René Descartes, the Cartesian models of pain, the earliest understanding of pain was what we experience should be proportional to the stimulus. There's a stimulus response phenomenon that we learn. So the pain that we experience, the magnitude of that should be proportionate to the injury, essentially meaning you need to have like a very severe injury to experience severe pain. Now we know that is not true. So over the years, research has established that our nervous system is it's such an amazing mechanism that it has evolved over time to predict when something could be potentially harmful or threatening or uh, dangerous to us. And that prediction or that perception of something negative to happen, these are essentially stored in our amygdala, hippocampus, like areas of our brain center, which store these memories as files and withdraw as and when we need it. So the catch here is essentially the prefrontal cortex, or thinking part of the brain, is the one that analyzes, helps us with critical thinking. Pain is a protective mechanism, but due to an injury or reasons, multiple reasons that now we know certain parts of it, pain tends to persist. The injury has healed, but the body still perceives and the nervous system still perceives that pain to be a protective mechanism. So people continue to live with pain even when the causative factor has been removed. So you end up with chronic pain, people living with pain for 10, 15, 20 years. And I've seen different walks, different aspects of conversations here with people. Uh, Hope is a common denominator. Those with hope and those without hope, those are common denominators that you find predicting clinical outcomes. You understand? So to me, one of those is it's taken me only 20 years to come to a question which actually helps me identify which way I need to go. So which essentially is one of the when you take your history, one of the things people tend to tell me is, I used to be able to run 5 kilometers. I used to be able to take my dog for a walk 5 kilometers a day 5 years ago, 2 years ago. Now I can hardly get out of my bed. So my question has always, initially I was trying to reframe. So can we set a goal? Like, can we do shorter goals? Like, what is it that you, as you were saying, right? Can we set smaller goals? Like, what can we work with here? Once I understood the tenets of coaching, I've integrated coaching to my clinical practice, and this is where usually the road bifurcates. You take the so my question then changed to what is it that you want? Who is it that you want to be? Do you want to go back to that person 5 years ago, or where do you see yourself 5 years from now? This basically, their response basically helps me determine should I follow with therapy or can I pursue coaching? So for people living with chronic pain, one technique, one treatment, one provider is not enough. Like it doesn't work. We know that. It's biopsychosocial, emotional, as well as spiritual components. There is so many elements. Essentially, to answer your question, Tracy, what happens with chronic pain is that pain becomes their identity. You are no longer the person you were, but you have become your pain. So every youth, I also deal with youth with chronic pain, which is a totally different subset. That's where my youth coaching initiatives came up. Uh, for them, for youth, I have to make this very clear because for youth, they haven't lived their life yet. Their future is already lost. For adults, they have a past that they can draw upon, so they're still clinging to the past. And they want that past, the present to match the past, which is really
Mm-hmm.
impossible, right? So, who gives them permission to start the grieving process? So, that's where grief enters the picture. To answer that question, which is why I said, Tracy, like this is so deep, like it would take like a lot of time for us to delve into it. But to summarize it, I would say if people living with chronic pain are actively navigating grief that they have never been able to process, or this is usually where hope actually comes in the way of progress because they are clinging on to the hope that they will recover or someone can fix them. And that is passive hope, and people around them tend to say stay positive, just hang in there, you can do this, but you actually cannot, because your body has overtaken your your entire nervous system, your neurological framework has shifted. And Tracy, you work with somatic awareness and mindfulness, right? Can you get someone to future think when they are in a state of flight freeze, what have you, in a sympathetic nervous system freeze, right? When the amygdala hijack happens, you cannot coach someone to relax. You cannot ask them to plan 10 years ahead. You have to ground them. You have to bring them to the present. You have to allow them to grieve the past, the self that was lost. Then and then only they can see the future. And this I have seen over past 20, 25 years. And it's taken me, and I believe this is coming more and more evident that even with the youth today, the advice we give them is that follow the path, trust the process, right? But we are doing that based on what the lived experiences of our past, whereas the youth do not have that buffer to fall back on. So we are advising them something based on what we have been through, which is not where where the world is right now. So it's a very complex mechanism, but with a very fundamental, very simple physiological and a neurological element component to it that we can really address through coaching, which I have found to be really effective, bringing them to the present and allowing them the time to grieve. And grief, as I mean, this was really surprising to me because I've talked to psychologists, psychiatrists, and grief counselors, and it's unanimous. Unequivocally, they say grief sometimes can be the catharsis process for renewing hope. And I'll pause there.
Yeah, I'd love to just sit with that for a moment. And all of you in the audience, if you can share what's coming up for you or any questions that are arising from that. I really felt that when you said that about how we need to grieve. And I think that there's, it resonates with some of what I'm hearing about the planet today. Like the only hope that we have for our planet is that we grieve what we've done to it. I hear climate activists talk about that. Also, something that you said I think is really important. When I was doing some research for this, I came across the topic of prisoners, people that are life prisoners. They know they're spending their life in prison, and their connection to hope needs to be a connection to hope has to be with what is possible. So, in other words, if they're connecting to, I'm going to get out tomorrow, that's never going to happen. And they're not going to be able to sustain that hope, right? So, what you brought in about grieving what we've lost, right? Maybe even in some cases, what we never had in the case of the youth. And then also knowing that our hope needs to be connected to, it can't be connected to something outside of possibility, although there does need to be a small bit of trust that we're also not going to be able to see all possibilities. And that's quite the balance there, isn't it?
Uh, uh, That's really summing it up well, Tracy. And it's so ironic that you mentioned the research. I haven't come across that one. Maybe I'll look into it. But like the movie I was referring to, Shawshank Redemption, these are two prisoners. They are in for life, right? So then there is no hope for them to get out. But then one person finds a way to get out and leaves the letter for the other person. When you get out, read this or find this letter. This will be here. And so it's so poetic and so powerful because, yeah, first is that acceptance piece, right? Like knowing that this is where I am, understanding the dynamics, the foundations, which again brings us back to Maslow's bedrock, like the safety, physiological needs, and the safety perspective. And I think that's really key. It's really important to stress that piece here, especially with our youth. When your future, like the way we knew the world to be in the map. I'm gonna draw from NLP here to talk about the map and the territory. Like the map that was handed to us still had the rudiments of the industrial education, like the era where everything, like I mean, we had the credential economy, right? And I was listening to Mark Carney the other day, and he said, nostalgia is not a strategy. I 100% agree. Nostalgia is not a strategy, but can hope be a strategy? You know, in the armed forces, they would say hope is not a strategy. You plan, you prepare, you do everything, and then you believe in yourself, right? But for someone who's joining the armed forces, hope is not just a strategy. Hope is a way of life. I mean, you've basically essentially written off your life in the service of your country and your fellow beings, and there's nothing more. How do we say, like nothing more hopeful than that I can find, because you are driving, you're deriving your personality, your identity, your purpose from within. There is a larger cause, but it's you that you are yourself putting. And I'm going to go back to Khalil Gibran when you say like, it is when you give of yourself that you give the most, right? When you give of your possessions, you give little, but when you give of yourself, you give the most, right? So that bedrock, like that comes from a very sound, fundamental, physiological safety, belonging perspective, or like that bedrock of Maslow's hierarchy upon which we build. But at coaching level, we are usually looking at the identity and the purpose. But unless this somatic foundation is strong and solid, you cannot coach someone for the higher realms. So that's what I think. Where you bring up that great point, where when your future is completely unpredictable. It's not following any track records of what was before. And I don't think even world leaders have a word for the world that we are in now. It's a new world order, as we call it, right? So we look at how we came into being, the difficulties we had to navigate, and that's what we pass on to our youth. But the youth of today have a completely different territory. It's not the land, the territory that we walked, and we are giving them the map that we used to navigate that territory. It's completely changed now. So, as coaches, I think it really helps us to sit with that for a second to understand things have completely changed. How are we dealing with these uncertainties in this moment? And where do we find the strength within us to say, or give them the space to grieve a future that they don't even know where it's going to be, or a past that's was not of their own design or making, because the Gen Zs of today are born into the bubble that we as, like, I mean, I would say for myself, like as the Gen X or someone walking that path, we saw both sides of the world. we knew a world before technology and we saw the evolution as it were happening and post that social media influx. Now we know we walk like three generational transitions within this short 50-year span, whereas the youth born after 2005 essentially was born with an iPhone, iPad, or like a smart device where you can actually call somebody and see them on screen. Growing up, I remember we used to talk about how cool would that be if you could actually see someone, you're talking to them. Yeah, like, yeah, who knows when that will come. But it came before we realized it came. And with that came a whole plethora of avenues where the youth today can turn to for advice. They don't have to seek their elders' opinion. Like they've lost faith. And that I think is a big piece where we ourselves are not sure as how we are navigating this world. And the youth seeking guidance from us feel no one can really answer their questions and no one is upfront about it. And that's usually what I find as the most challenging. How do I tell a youth that I don't know? It's taken a lot of effort and a lot of commitment to say, I don't know, but can we find out? So I'm here with you to sit with them, give them the space to grieve or give them the space to reflect and join them in that uncertainty. And it's difficult. And I see that it is heavy. I will not lie. And it's when we work with people living with chronic pain, you're telling them you're never going to recover or you're never going to back to who you were. Can we look at who you can be? What is this pain teaching you? With youth, I don't know the land that you're walking. This we are navigating this. This is new to us. But because we have navigated or we have adapted, we feel they should be able to do as well. But we had a different formative years where we still had that human connect, where we still had that human interaction and generational wisdom passed down to us. Whereas the youth today are turning to social media, and we all know what wisdom the social media can generate. True, there is a lot of truth for one part, but there is a lot of misinformation as well. So sifting what is true, what is not true, what is real, what's unreal, what's useful, what's not useful, that I feel is our job as coaches, as adults leading the next generation. We should be able to sit with the uncertainty for ourselves first, sit with youth or anyone to tell them, I don't know the answer just yet, but can we find out? I'm here right now with you. Can we find out? So I'm not sure if I'm digressing here, Tracy, but I just want to bring it back to one of those. Grief to me is like very adjacent to apathy. Like unless we handle or unless we reconcile grief, that can lead to inaction, and that can be detrimental. So coming back to how does this really tie in with hope? Hope is that piece where you show up with your authentic true self, and the youth of today can connect with that. They don't need advice. Honestly, I've heard, like I've talked to mid-level, senior level executives who feel like they're hiring, and I think a lot of people can resonate with that. And I have a very close family member as well, who's a team lead and who's working with Gen Z. And say, you're talking about all this, but are the Gen Zs even aware of this? Do they even know that they need to change or there is a need? I said, like, where is that question coming from, right? So it's our own internal reflection of, so you say, like, I mean, there are communications I get from one particular team member who doesn't even say please in their emails. They're asking for time off, or they never say please. Yeah, the Gen Zs of today are different. Like they're very aware of their mental health. They're quite aware of what they want and what they don't want. And they're quite intelligent. They are not helpless as we think they are. They are hope fatigued, for want of a better word. I would say they've tried different things, but they don't have a benchmark. They don't have a parameter of lived experience to draw back on. So this goes back to our conversation about when is hope useful, right? Like, I mean, the resilience piece come with evidence, like evidence of successes, like, in short measures, small steps. When you've achieved a small goal, that goes back to that feedback loop of every time I see uncertainty, I don't have to panic. I don't have to let the amygdala hijack, right? But for someone who has not had that much of experience with successes or joyful steps or measures in life, it's a long way. So they are dealing with a complete abyss, an unknown of what the potential future could look like. And we, as coaches or as an adult, as someone catering to their need, as a parent especially, if we don't have that space where we can sit with them and share that anxiety with them, uh, we may not be able to break ground very much. So pause there.
Yeah, it always comes down to authenticity, to meeting people where they're at. Um, and also, what you said, I think is really important. Like, we're never going to return to what we are, right? We think we are. We never will. Like, time marches on. It's not very forgiving. But we have this idea of ourselves in our head, idea of what we want to be or where we want to, what we want to get back to. Um, and the other thing is that being of the generation that grew up with the Cold War, with the threat of nuclear war over our heads, and all of the fear of communism and everything that we grew up in, that I grew up with in Canada with. And then all of a sudden the Berlin Wall came down, right? No one anticipated that. That just happened. And so I think recognizing that things happen that we never are ever going to anticipate all the time. Sometimes they happen for the worse, sometimes they happen for the better, right? And I think that our connection to hope has to be that we will navigate it as best we can. We have to trust ourselves that we are going to navigate it as best we can. We are going to show up as best we can, as long as we're connecting to that part of ourselves that wants to do well, that wants to leave this world in a better place than what we found it, right? And that wants to connect with people in such a way that we're making a difference, that we're adding value to them. We're adding value to our connections. And so I think hope also has to be anchored with that intention. And that intention really has to be inside of us.
I'm just trying to take that in for a second, Tracy. And I think the key word is intentional, and that anchor, the grounding that needs to happen for us to not lose hope, right? Like, and we are
Mhm.
so often used to hearing lose. What does losing hope mean, right? So I think that's, to your point, it's the world as we knew it's over. So
Mhm.
that I say credential economy in the sense where there was a pattern of work hard, get good grades, a job is guaranteed. That's gone. Whether we realize it or not, I'm seeing this in so many very close conversation I had recently. Someone's opting to look at different subjects than the construed social pathway of medical and engineering, or like an architectural pathway, because AI can do most of the jobs. Why would I even go there? There is no, sir. Some of the jobs we have today, what guarantee is that 10 years, 15 years down the line, those jobs are going to be there? Zero guarantee. We don't have an answer to that. So it is fundamentally, this is the time, I would think, when, as you said, the Berlin Wall came. There have been moments in history where history has rewritten itself, or these are pivotal, seminal moments where a new process is starting. And I do believe the last 25 years of this new era, like this new century, it's been happening. And this again is something that came up when I was reading, or like, I mean, I've been trying to write a book in a way. It's completed almost, but it's on youth and what has happened to us over the world, over the years. So I don't know if you remember Y2K. For me, Y2K, like in 2000,
Mhm.
at the turn of the millennia, we laugh at it now, but that was very real. I remember, like, we were all waiting to see how the world was going to end, and it was like the Nostradamus prediction of, yeah, some cataclysmic event is going to happen and it's going to wipe us all out. And it was through the electronic, but nothing happened. right? Like the clock ticked over, everything happened. But I know people who have lived through that would resonate with that. But now that I was doing over the past 6 months when I've been working on it just made me think, honestly, like actually the world did change, but not in a way that we thought was imminent and like a doomsday. But over the past 25 years, the transitions that have happened has led to us where we are now. The next 25 years going to be it's going to be completely different from what we have experienced, and that this we know for sure. So what are some things that we can really infer from history, because that's usually what the future holds, right? If history has taught us anything, that history repeats itself, like, I mean, people don't change. So what does that change look like? I mean, what are the things that would actually make sure that the world that we leave behind, or the world that we help the upcoming generation navigate, is a healthier, I mean, climate change, AI, the threat of war, these are like things we never had to deal with or like had to actually live through in the sense that it's happening now, not to mention the economic uncertainty. So I think that's the hidden denominator here as well. So there's a lot of questions out there right now which no one really has a answer to or a handle to, but to me, that's okay. We have been through this before. We should get through, or we will get through on it. And that is hope in a way. But what's the action? We need to have the hope based on what has happened. But what is that action? To me, when I was trying to think through this, is like based on what we have been through, what the younger generation needs, or what we as adults right now needs, are certain tools or agencies or pathways towards moving towards finding that resilience within. And again, it's internal. I saw a question here: is there a nature versus nurture explanation for there are some inherent or not? And this will take us back to Martin Seligman's theory of learned optimism, and even prior to the work with Nair on learned helplessness. Like animals, when they were given repeated shocks, they stopped trying, right? I mean, even when they could escape, like, so each time they were in cages and they tried to escape, they were given shocks, and after a point they stop. Or an elephant, if you look at an elephant, once they've been tied to a chain to a strong post, they try to yank it and they can't, and they give up. Then after a while, even if it's the small thread, like sometimes they don't even tie the thread, just the feeling of that rope or the thread on their legs, the animal doesn't move. And that is the nature versus nurture. There could be inherent factors, which again goes into psychiatric or the psychological factors, depression, etc. Those are a completely different field. But what I was trying to get at is, it is a habit. Being hopeful and finding how do solutions to problems at hand, that's a habit, and that's something you can actually nurture over nature. Even if you have been siblings who have been brought up with the same fundamental environments, growing up environments, they tend to become different in life in terms of achievements or how they deal with uncertainties. However, I do believe that there are ways. Coaching is an essential or an integral part, I would even say, in terms of identifying what are those self-limiting beliefs, what are those unbiased checks we haven't done for ourselves. Where are the times when we say, yeah, it's not gonna work, so I'm not gonna even try, there's no point. So when do we feel stuck, and what's that dialogue, what's that narrative that goes through our head, and whose narrative is that? This is, I think, where that critical difference is, where we have been handed a map from our parents or from our elders of a path that they walked. So are we still keeping to that narrative? And is that what we are passing down to them? So this is something that I do with when we work with youth. What is the map? Like, what is the narrative that goes on in your head? Whose narrative is that? Is it your own, or is it someone else's that has been passed on to you in terms of a value system? So we examine that identity piece, and that leads us to the identity piece, and from there on, purpose. And I mean, I can go on about purpose, but because that again is a big topic. Purpose, as we look at in a way, it's not the destination. If we can make that distinction, I think, Tracy, that brings us back to hope as being a catalyst, not as the essential driver needed. It is absolutely needed, but there are other factors through. You need a vision and you need an action plan. Together, that becomes hope. So I don't know if that makes sense. Again, to answer your question, having hope, that's not naive. I don't think that's naive, but naive hope, I think that probably that's what Seligman was arguing against. So hope is in naive, but naive hope is.
Mm. And it's really beautiful how it really comes back to the essence of coaching, right? Like having a vision, having an action plan. In a sense, as well, I think it's important to acknowledge that there are going to be moments that we're going to lose hope, right? Um, and there's a difference between having periods of hopelessness and have being chronically hopeless or being cynical, right? And we could get it, but that could be a whole other conversation.
I'm just
But I
in
think
that.
what's real,
Sorry to cut you.
sorry, go ahead.
Just, just saying that, like, there are times when we need that pessimism or that cynicism.
Yeah.
It's really helpful. That's to assess risk, right? Like, I mean, from a clinical perspective, I would say, like, if someone has an unrealistic expectation or hope that they're going to get better, there is a time you need that. But overall, like, yeah, that really doesn't serve us much. But from a coaching perspective, it's so important to identify what level of hopefulness is this person operating on. Sorry to jump in there, but yeah.
No, thank you for that. Um, and you know, being hopeless, I think in those moments, that's what community is there for, right? If you think about it, like again, while I was doing some research, they were talking about the trope of the Disney movie. You know, the character has a dream, they go after their dream, they meet up with an obstacle, and at some point they give up, right? There's always that moment in a movie where the main character gives up, and what happens? Their friends rally around them and they work together, and then that, you know, inspires them again. And so I think it really just speaks to the importance of us being there for each other and being there for each other to hold each other up when we're tired, when we just need to take a break, when being hopeful just feels like too much in that moment. Yeah.
And just to add on to that, having lived through COVID over the past 5 years, for many people that's over. But I feel essentially it's that's when everyone came together, right? And we faced one event as a global catastrophe, like an epidemic and pandemic, and we survived, right? And having a community, that's what differentiates us, like as human beings, where you can evolve, right? And this is evolution. We are evolving, and I'm gonna call it as is. This is a human growth. This is an evolutionary phase that we are going through, and we need everyone. We need all the hands we can get on deck for this. Yes.
We do. We're at that time. We're rounding up to the end of the session, and I recognize that we have some questions in the chat. I wanted to also just let participants know we'll be following up with some resources. So we'll also take some of your questions and expand on them as well. Um, Harry, I would love if you can just sort of leave, what is it that you would like to leave the participants with regards to our conversation today? And also if you can just talk a little bit about what you have coming up.
Absolutely, Tracy. And again, I just want to thank you and Coacharya for this platform and this opportunity to share some of those heavy feelings as we were talking about, to share that with the community and to be inspired with the people who are actually walking the same pathways with us. So what is it that I want to leave with? Again, I think to draw from what we have discussed, I think how can you, for those who have been listening in and sharing their thoughts, maybe reflect on our own practices, in the sense, has there been opportunities where uh, the situation has presented where you have an opportunity to witness grief with a client, and how best have we handled that? So what else could help us move forward? So sometimes just giving the space, giving the time, sitting with that grief, being that brave person, so that could really help. And I do an activity called the I Am Wheel with the youth. So that's what's upcoming, Tracy. I'll just talk about that, in which it's the same as the 60, like, I mean, the wheel of life, the purpose of the, but there is one segment that I find is useful, which is called the growing edges. So if you were to map your own in this terms of your values, your aspirations, etc., but have that one segment as a growing edge, what is one area you would like to grow, that you're currently growing, or where you find growth could accentuate your person, your well-being, yourself? Maybe that's something everyone can take home and maybe look at it. Community as hope is essentially what you just mentioned, Tracy. I think it's important to keep these conversations going and have participation. Maybe the other piece I would think about is maybe, how do I frame this? Like, hope is not something that we wait for. It's not a feeling you're waiting for. It's something that you actively take charge of. It's something that you can build within yourself. Problems happen. What is one small step? Is there something that we've been keeping aside, putting away for a while now? Is there something, a tiny action that you can take, which will evidence to you that you have agency? And this is something that will be useful to everyone when they are dealing with people who are talking about uncertainty and feeling stuck. The feeling of stuckness, this we have explored many times over. Essentially, hope, is there hope for this person? Where does this person operate out of? What does hope mean to them? Could be a great question. I find sometimes it opens up channels you've never even thought of. So maybe that's something people can take away with, which has over the past 6 months to 8 months driven me. So we in developing a coaching program for people dealing or like trying to help youth. Essentially, it's for youth coaches, but also for parents and other adults who are mentoring youth. This is designed for the Gen Z. It started with my coaching practices with Gen Z, but I've been asked to look at like how can we pay this knowledge forward. So this coaching program essentially looks at it stems from an incident that I had with one of my clients, a youth who said, you know what, it sounds stupid to you, but I had to Google how do I deal with uncertainty at 1 o'clock in the middle of exams. So she didn't ask for how do I pass the exam, she Googled how do I deal with uncertainties. And I had to say, it threw me for a loop. I have to be honest. When have I Googled something like that? I've never had to, because I've always had people to fall back on. That's where our youth is. So we've created a program. Hopefully, like in the next 2 months or so, I think we can. I'm hoping to launch that one. But it essentially deals with what the youth of today are dealing with. What I found useful. There are some very specific grounded strategies that we can use to find out where they are in the present and help them navigate the uncertain future together, which we don't know yet, but yes, we can do that together. So that's what's coming up now.
Thank you. And it's a program that is so needed right now, right? Because if we think of our hope is so connected to the youth that are going to be the future of this world. And so, for anyone that's looking to find out more about that program, please contact us at support@coacharya.com. We'll also send a follow-up after this session. And we have other programs coming up. Pranav Ramanathan, who's here in the audience actually, and myself have a life and leadership coaching program starting next week. So please connect with us. It's both coach training and leadership development in one. Thank you all so much for being here. If anything gives me hope, it's all of you, everyone that actively chooses a path to try to make a difference in the world. And so thank you for being here. Thanks for all of your gorgeous, gorgeous insights and questions. And we will be following up with some more resources. And we'll be back. I'll be back here next month. So we'll be reaching out and letting you know what that'll be about. Thank you, everyone. And we'll see you soon.
Thanks, Tracy, and thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye for now.